Hello and welcome back to Generation Yours, the podcast that's intergenerational, addressing the topics of sustainability, tech and real estate. As always, I am Joseph Michael Daniels.
And I'm Colin Horn. That's about it, really.
Yeah, and we have a very special guest today, one that I've had the fortune of knowing for quite a long period of time. Now, before we get into the guest, did you know that there is a thing called BREEAM? Now, BREEAM is what we'd really understand as kind of green building protocol. But did you know there's 600,000 assets globally with the BREEAM certificate? And then there's this little organisation you may have heard of called the NHS, the National Health Service, 180 billion or something they spend up here.
Small. Yeah.
Sounds small.
Yeah.
You know, only probably most of the country. And NHS has property. You've probably been to at least one of them, your local community. Well, there's over 3,000 of those types of buildings, little community, you know, GP practitioners, surgeries, things like that. And how is the state of sustainability and infrastructure affecting these smaller community places? Because obviously it don't seem planners care too much about local GP surgeries anymore, especially with the lack of building that's going on.
Yep.
So we have an amazing guest on today, Dr. Shamir Ghumra. Shamir, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello. Well, lovely to be here. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Colin. Nice to meet you both and you again after many times I've met this bloke, but there we are. That's life. So yeah, really pleased to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Yeah. So let's just get into like the start of it. What's your role? And let's just start with that before we get onto the BREEAM stuff. What's your role right now? The NHS Property Services is a bit different. What is it?
So NHS Property Services is a separate limited company that reports into government. So we look after, as you said, about 3,000 buildings across England primarily. A lot of community service buildings, so your GP surgery, the clinics and that type of stuff, a lot of those buildings that we've got. As then you can imagine, it's a range, some maybe quite new and shiny, maybe more that are less so. So it really does reflect the sort of typology of the buildings that we've got in the country. So I look after the sustainability side of things there, so energy, environment, CSR, volunteering, a lot of the community engagement that we have through charity partnerships and things like that. And then I've got some oversight for some other areas like procurement, health and safety, culture across the organisation.
Nice. I mean, where I'm from, Southend-on-Sea, for my sins, our NHS buildings, including my local GP surgery, is quite dated, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
Southend Hospital, which you may or may not be aware of, is not necessarily the nicest looking thing in the entire world. I mean, because ultimately the NHS bless them, they do take a bit of a battering in the press and stuff at the moment, and obviously I can imagine your job's pretty tough to kind of, you know, deal with the sustainability side of things. In terms of everything that comes with it at the moment, how much at the forefront of the NHS's mind is sustainability? Is it a real focal point?
It is massive, and I think it's really important for that everyone and your listeners can hopefully understand that it's, you know, it is absolutely up there as a massive priority for the NHS. But we've got to do it within the context of all the buildings, as you say, maybe a bit dated, might need liquor paint investment and backlog maintenance and other bits that need to be sorted out. So how can we do all those things in one intervention? So if you've got a GP's practice, you know, they don't be shut down for a weekend, or if you've got to make interventions in the evenings and you've got to fix a roof, fix a leaky pipe or something, how can you just try and get all that stuff done in one pass? You know, put some better insulation in, change the windows, whatever the interventions are, put in LEDs. We've had millions that we've spent on LEDs across loads of parts of our estate over the last few years. But you've got to try and do it in conjunction with your customer. And I think that's so critical that actually we'll be able to do it in a way that creates benefit for obviously ourselves and for our customers, but actually patients, people like you, for next time you go in, I don't know if it's one of ours, can't check. But we've got to be able to do that in a way that's looking at the system-wide benefit as well, because people go in there, everyday people, some of your listeners going in every day to these buildings, how you feel about that space. Because if you're not feeling great in the first place, generally speaking, and you're going into an environment when you want it to make you feel better, you want to be able to make the best of that situation, or the green space that's outside, you know, all of these things, we're continuously looking at how we can take a system-wide view of making the patient experience better, because ultimately all we all want is better patient outcomes.
So let's address that actually, because I feel like transparently, a lot of the NHS buildings you go into that were built I'd say, well, anything I've actually been into, they aren't very inviting. You just mentioned green space and stuff, and like the dynamic of that. I've always felt that they kind of feel a little bit like they don't want you there because you are costing money. I feel like, you know, when you go to them, they've got the glass shield in front of you in case the woman behind the desk, they've got pens on things that I must steal the pen.
Yeah, okay.
Do you know what I mean? I go in, I sit on a chair, that chair's not comfortable, they got one TV rolling out Kiss FM on repeat. Do you know what I mean? So like, and they've got posters. The posters, they haunt me to this day.
Oh yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Posters about disease I didn't know I could get.
You weren't you start worrying, didn't you, straight away?
You start like, I'm like, do I need to be here or should I live here? So I think coming around to that, the point is that something that you're looking into? Because we talk ESG.
Yes.
Me and you could talk about, and we probably will later in the podcast, about green building and what that means. Like, in my opinion, that's not the hard bit. How is that going to impact the future planning of NHS Property Services? What are you got in the roadmap? Because I know what you do, right? And what you've been through, where you've come from in your career. And it is a lot about addressing the whole factors. That's what BREEAM is, right? It was about addressing all of it to build better places, the reality of it, regardless if I like it or not. That's what it was for.
Yeah.
What's your take on that? What are you bringing to the table? What are the NHS Property Services going to do in that space?
I mean, I'm not in charge of posters, so I can't do much about that, unfortunately. So sorry about that. It is hard, isn't it? Because you want to be able to create the best possible outcome, but when you've got the building fabric that we're looking at, or the asset where it is, and you've got to look at the clinical need as well. So you might have two buildings half a mile away, or two buildings that are 4 miles apart. You know, how do we look at the best service provision? So, okay, having two buildings, would you consolidate into one? Make a slightly, put your investment into one, make it slightly better, change the posters and whatever else you need to do, right? Just to make it better for more people. But then you look at the geography, that actually, well, that one 4 miles away serves a small town. And actually there's people who are getting older, they won't be able to drive as far, or actually that's not as convenient. And then you think, oh no, well, actually the community needs us building there. We can't then just have a mass consolidation into a handful of ultra buildings, because you're actually not then including large parts of our nation. And that's the real trickiness about all this, isn't it?
Like, what metrics do you use to kind of record what is perhaps a successful building and what's not? I'm guessing sustainability is up there, but obviously I'm guessing a lot of the data won't necessarily be there for that sustainability at this point in time. Obviously patient success rate, for want of a better word. Like,
is that what keeping them alive?
I don't know. I don't know, like how you like what's that's a great building, that one.
Yeah,
that's compared to like what's not a good building.
Yeah, so we have a reasonable handle on it. Always can be better, and I'm sure we'll get onto data, as we always do, about all these things, about its energy performance, in EPC ratings and DEC ratings and stuff. So we've gradually been eking out ones that are the worst performing buildings within our portfolio. Invest, or you dispose of buildings and they become other things. Okay, but when you talk about patient outcomes, a couple of key metrics that we're really keen to that we look at is, if we make an intervention, how many patients and people has that impacted? So the GP's community surgery might only take 5,000 to 10,000 people a year, but actually we make an intervention on the green space, or better access for people with accessibility challenges, and it might be that you've got an old building where people didn't think about wheelchair access in the 1950s. Well, actually, but and how we found a way to get those people into the building. I'm not well, I can't even get in easily. I've got to go round the back, past the car park, through, past the sheds, past the bins, and then you're in. Like, this cannot be right. So we've been making those types of interventions for some time. The green space, the building fabric, and things that we can do itself. But also we've got to take a view across the nation when we have got massive social disparity in our country still, and there are areas of high social deprivation. This is a reality and that we face. So we try and take a balanced view to say, well, if we are going to spend and the limited capital that we have to make some of these buildings better, the spaces better and all the rest of it, let's try and spend more of it in those areas. Because actually, when you talk about social outcomes, it's not necessarily that moment you finished fixing something, making it better. It's sometimes generational, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the communities where those buildings serve and are part of that other ecosystem of buildings and things that are happening, that it creates a change.
Does GP retention, has that been linked to the quality of the buildings? Because I've got a few GP friends who have left the NHS and now gone private, because obviously the facilities, not obviously, but a lot of the facilities are top whack. Is that something that ever comes up, or is that not really a thing? Is that a concern?
Well, we've got a long-standing connection with GPs, and many of our tenants are GPs, and we work incredibly closely with them to try and help reduce their costs as well. So some of these interventions that we talk about, actually, let's put some LEDs in, let's get you on a better energy rate or whatever it might be. But it's quite a complex situation, isn't it? Because many GPs are contractors, in a sense, aren't they? It's a really difficult, challenging political environment as well, because of obviously everything else that's going on as we talk. So the bits that we can influence, absolutely, we should be supporting GPs to make the best use of the buildings that they've got.
I find it's really interesting, this topic of conversation, because it's such a multitude of factors. You know, you bring in guests that are just real estate or banks or whatever, they've got a one-story outcome, right? Let's be straight. We can do the ESG all day, and we've had some amazing guests on here that are very ESG focused. The principal pillar of the bank or the real estate company, at the end of it, is economic gain.
Yes.
You might be the first guest that we've had on where actually your metrics probably aren't just economic. Actually, if anything, it's kind of reducing the economic impact and improving the social environmental outcome. How do you, let's go on to this BREEAM bit, because I keep mentioning it, and I'm aware that some of our viewers may not understand what it is and how that's going to impact it. From your perspective, firstly, could you just describe what BREEAM is when you were there at BRE? Because I do think that there's a link here between the quality of the NHS Property Services and your previous work at BREEAM, and how do you see that your intelligence on this topic matter of BREEAM and assessment and building understanding, placement, social value? How do you see that as a part of you playing this role in the NHS, which I think does need some beautification, socialisation, democratisation of energy vibe around it?
Yeah. Okay, so for those of you who may be listening and have not come across BREEAM before, so it's an environmental assessment methodology owned by BRE down in Watford, and it's been going for 20-something years now, nearly close to 30-odd years now. And it's an assessment methodology to look at a whole range of issues and criteria within the building itself, and in some cases what's immediately around it. So waste, water, transport, carbon, those types of things. It assesses and benchmarks all that kind of data to give you a rating for your building. And those ratings can be sort of pass, good, very good, excellent, and so on. So that's been around a long time. That methodology is quite common to lots of these types of building assessment methodologies.
And you were head of
Yes, so I ran BREEAM globally, which is where you and I first met, across the pond.
We'll have to get onto that story. That's actually quite interesting. Yeah. We will jump on that.
It's actually quite interesting. I thought it was, but never mind. Only actually. So it's been going really well. As you said earlier, obviously 600,000 assets certified, probably more now. Obviously it's been a year since I've left nearly. And how can I sort of bring some of that thinking into what we've been doing? And one of those, and I think maybe some of your other guests have probably already alluded to, there's been a real shift in the investment and banking sectors to look at the in-use performance of buildings. So yes, I can build it, it's a new build, happy days, but will it perform and deliver on the sustainability outcomes I intended it to have when I first built it? Because we put human beings into these places, and quite frankly, loads of other things can start to happen. Or will the fabric perform as intended? Lots of other factors come into play. So there's been a big shift with major global investment houses and real estate organisations to look at in-use performance of buildings, and that's something I very much saw the growth of with that in-use scheme there. And sort of looking at the assets and the portfolio that we've got now within NHS Property Services, how can we sort of apply that same kind of rationale and logic to say, well, a huge proportion of what we've got is already here, and more as we get closer to these milestone years and dates to whatever there might be, well, more of what we've here is still going to be here, actually. So therefore, we've really got to start to recognise new build as a space, absolutely, but really get into the nuts and bolts of whole life asset performance and asset management more generally. I think is absolutely where we'll be going over the coming years, which really dovetails into all these other challenges you hear about with public sector buildings, backlog maintenance, challenges around different technologies and materials, whatever there might be. But actually, you've got to factor all of that in to look at the whole life performance of the asset to take the best view possible to ensure you are safeguarding patient outcomes for 20, 30 years out.
Does that matter to you more? Because we've had the biggest builders on the podcast that are innovating. Does it matter to you as the NHS Property Services more than a normal organisation that isn't just renting it? You guys have responsibility.
Yeah, and I think this is, others at private sector doing great things, and I think there's lots of learning from private sector into the public. But ultimately we are here, we exist for patients
Serve
and
the
our
nation.
customers, and that's
The National Health
what
Service, right?
kind of includes in the name. And I think that's that's a massive driver for lots of my colleagues within NHS Property Services. It's just you go around to various hospitals or GP surgeries and things like that. You meet the people. In many cases, we've got catering, got cleaning, we've got FM, people doing engineering, fixing boilers and whatever else. And just the level of personal commitment that you see from our colleagues is incredible, and that's what makes it work. And it's reflective of the whole many people within the NHS all together, the doctors, nurses, clinicians, technicians, everybody. It's just that sense of value and purpose behind what we're trying to do. I'm not getting all evangelical or preachy about it, so don't worry, you can keep listening. But when we get into that, then you want to do that bit more. You want to try and think slightly more innovatively. How do we, yes, it's hard, but I think increasingly, particularly with sustainability, we have got to start to get into the much harder stuff to do. People talk about low-hanging fruit all the time. I get it, and you can put LEDs for a long time. That's great.
I love that.
I'm in the world of no, we've got to properly look at decarbonising heat. Massive baseload of heat. And a number of people tell you stories. I've been into this surgery or this place, and it's roasting. Yeah. I've rolled windows. We've got to understand our internal environments so much more granularly than we do at the moment. And that's why I think, as you say, taking a holistic view, but you've got to make it practical. You've got to think about all this cool stuff that's going to have the least amount of disruption to a GP.
Yeah.
Because to say to a GP, I've got all this wonderful stuff, I can fund it and we can do this and that for you, but you've got to shut for 2 weeks. Problem. Where are you going to go for 2 weeks? And how many hundreds, if not thousands, of patients that should be going through, and then you hear about obviously how difficult it is.
Every hour is
everyone.
You see that with your. Also, I know we spoke off camera about trying to inspire the new generation of, your Gen Zs, etc. In terms of sustainability. Obviously, your buildings are where the community goes. It's where everyone goes. Yeah. And obviously, you've got your 1-year-olds up to your 80-year-olds. You've got every single generation that goes. Do you think it's an opportunity for you to, in a tiny little way, just impact them and just inspire by hopefully creating the buildings that you want to create in terms of sustainability and making them look, not necessarily making them a work of art, but because I think a lot of times there's a stigma about sustainability, and I was one till I met Joe. I just thought of God bless, she's not passed away, Greta Thunberg and stuff. That's what I thought about.
God bless her.
Just check that.
But that's what I used to think about. And I think it's really impactful to hear people like the NHS and like yourself trying to actually make a change, actually care about what they're doing. So I don't know what I was trying to say. There's more of a point than the question.
Yeah, it's where should they be more aspirational?
Should the buildings be? Because look at schools, they get SIF funding, the government funding. Yeah. Those buildings some of these buildings are insane now.
Let's not talk about the modular ones that just had to be shut down.
Oh, yeah.
But you're right. No, you're right. You think about these amazing schemes, and you kind of, it is inspirational and aspirational, and I don't know, but maybe the NHS has looked at as a necessary than it is actually somewhere where literally science innovates. Biomedical sciences is coming to Canary Wharf now. So what do you think on that, the aspirational topic?
It is incredible, isn't it? When you look at the tech med world of how will we diagnose ourselves in the future?
AI, can we get onto that?
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get to AI. No podcast is complete without AI.
AI,
but you've got to be able to look at how the clinical dimension of everything that we're not clinicians, absolutely not. But we are a fundamental part of that fabric and ecosystem. So actually how people get treatment, or how they're seen, and how the diagnosis is shared, how you get your medication, all this other kind of stuff is evolving massively. AI's got a role to play in that, risks and challenges and everything else in between. But then how does the estate reflect that? Which is massive. We've got to be able to kind of adapt our estate to say, great, well, in 20 years' time, if you don't need one of them, or you need one of them, or actually, is it more important to have better connectivity within the environment because you're in...
But it's also inspiring. It's such a complex political topic, which is why I like this podcast so much. And that we've got to look at certain facets and ways that we talk about things, because there is a political, economic, and such. But if you take a kid to the zoo who wants to become a zookeeper, you take a kid to a football game, wants to become a footballer. You take a kid to a classroom and the kid enjoys school because it's a really fun teacher. Kid wants to become a teacher. What was your first thoughts when you walked into your local GP surgery?
I hate my GP.
Okay.
I went in it, right? I had a mole that I was very concerned about, right? Shouldn't have had too many sunbeds, right? But I went there and I had this mole and I've been worried about it for ages. And I'm not the type I'm very nervous about going to a GP, bricking it. And I went there and I was obviously like, I thought I was dying. I thought I was waiting for my prognosis. I thought I've got 3 months to go, that's it. And he's like, show me your mole then. I'm like, no, like, cause I showed him, he went, that's fine. I was like, yeah, but you haven't like looked at it with a little thing. And I think that's what I think, like, that's the GP thing, that's a personal thing, that's not necessarily the building side of things. But even then, the building it's not a very nice building. And
but this is the thing, so if we talk about that and go, okay, we obviously want to inspire more people to get into the health service. Mm-hmm. I think biomedical sciences with AI is incredible. I genuinely, I keep a massive eye on it, especially as Elixir, because it's one of the space I want to go into. I wear a Whoop, so I actually have AI now that tracks my heart rate and sleep, just so I can assess how I am, my drinking patterns, my eating patterns, so I can know my body, because AI now says, like, if you do these certain factors, I'm a machine. Based on the thousands of data inputs that I have, I can tell you the better way to be is this way, because I'm not just guessworking or reading from a book here, it's data. That is incredible, and it has an incredible opportunity to change the way this country is. There's talk about Cambridge, Silicon Valley, there's talk about Canary Wharf Biomedical Sciences. Is the community for the buildings, and it's weird that we're talking about NHS Property Services in this context, but is it something that, if it is a sustainable building, if it is nice, if it is redeveloped, regenerated, is that something that starts to inspire what is a British public that hasn't been lining up to become nurses? Is that something that could influence?
I'd also add, I think it'd save lives as well. I think it'd encourage people to go and get checked. I think, like, you smack me on that point, but yeah, I think it inspired me. If I knew I had a beautiful, lovely place to go, I'd probably go for it if I had a lump or bump or whatever. So I interjected there, but
no, but it is, isn't it? And that's what, as you say, Joe, it's the whole multifaceted approach to all of this, isn't it? Because yes, if you want to go to, and for many children, it might be that actually they had a great experience with a doctor or a GP, or actually something happened at the playground or something, got fixed up, happy days, and then they get inspired that way to become a doctor or a nurse. And this is where's the building meet the profession type of thing. You can put, and this is a commonality for me, isn't it? Looking at the flow of assets and all the various things that people do within them actually can be anything. And therefore you can be as inspired about the person that you're meeting to do the thing, whatever it might be. But then other people come away from building and go, wow, you're calling about the whole, wow, look at this place, this is amazing. Oh, look at all this other tech that's around. And I think it's hard, isn't it? Because you want to be able to kind of convey, like, there's loads of good stuff going on in this building. And we've got some of these places down in Canary Wharf that we've got, and really nice places that I've been to, and I think, God, this is really better than my house, And so there are pockets of these things, and how do you kind of make that more accessible to more people? So in the Canary Wharf example, it's a new GP's practice. It's wonderful, and there are more GPs kind of lining up. The list is growing, and it will become really, really active. And I'm having confidence people will go there. I think, God, this is a really nice place to be, and and if you're in a nicer environment, people feel a bit happier about it.
You've got more GPs line up to come and work
in that one.
Yeah, so that's interesting.
And Canary Wharf is become a viable place in that it's gone from being a banking central. They've introduced a residential. Now they're introducing a lot of hospitality and a lot of fun stuff. There's go-karting now in the bases.
It's more about community now, isn't it?
It's becoming a community development. And this is, I think, what this before we jump onto the point about data, because I want to close on some data discussions. I think it's always important to close on data. Just because you need to know what you're doing.
He always does this.
Always. But
years I've had this.
Data.
I love data. Data informs us. That's how we create the AI engines. But the community, and this is an important thing I think to take away from this, is that the communities are built from the places we go. And people, maybe think I'm biased because I built buildings first, but my intention was never to build buildings, it's to build smart cities. I never came to anyone saying I'm going to be the best house builder. I happened to be one of the best because I cared about what I was trying to do. I was trying to research and develop.
Yeah.
But the reality of it is, it's about building place. And places are built around schools. They're built around hospitals, or not even hospitals, GP. Hospitals are last resort. Do you know what I mean? You don't go to hospital. No one wants to go to hospital. But I may want to pop to my GP just to check on this little lump that I have going on. And I think that is a really impactful thing, especially taking into consideration the experiences of the BREEAM. Now coming into the data, which I found really interesting, you mentioned, how do you assess what is off the back of an EPC? Now, you worked at BRE and you know more. I think you were the first one to hear my views on EPCs about 3 or 4 years ago. Yes. We met because I was flying to University of California, Davis, happened to bump into Shamir, really wild. So I bumped into Shamir because I was meeting the head of ops at BREEAM in America because I was trying to build a house with UC Davis after building the UK. Never met Shamir, even though we'd been in the same room probably about a dozen times.
Weird.
Super weird. And I was like, because I was convinced that BREEAM in use, EPCs weren't good enough. I couldn't use it for my buildings. And even though we got 108 and stuff like that, I was like, I'm not using it. And people were like, well, we have to. I was like, I don't want to use it. Like, it's not. But BREEAM was that kind of step up that I could use. That was kind of informed by some data. So what do you think the next steps are to close out on how can our communities, how can properties that are community properties, NHS, invested by government, benefit from understanding how things work?
Yeah, and you know, I won't get into the pros and cons of an EPC necessarily, but you know, a lot of it was predicated around actually how do we communicate to the public. So actually, I've got my fridge, I've got a thing, I've got a rating, I can associate that's good and that's not so good. So there's a whole kind of psychological marketing thing around, obviously, right, okay, this is better. So I'm in a building now and there's a certificate, I can see, right, his rating is whatever. Okay, but it doesn't come to life, does it? And this is the whole thing around the work that you and I discussed over many years about how can we make that more accessible to more people. So you can have a super techie conversation and some people will get it. Wonderful, right? But then a lot of people would go, you what? Kind of, really? Did that? I don't know. I'm here for this. I'm here because I need to get this mold checked out or whatever. And then I don't necessarily want to be surrounded by loads of charts and the screen that has got Kiss FM on it, but actually it's got a load of graphs about its usage or a meter and a readout, and people are going there because they want treatment, you know, because then you can imagine somebody else going, well, rather than me waiting here for 3 hours or 2 hours or whatever time it's been, well, how much is all that is that costing you? Where's the benefit? Yeah. And this is about translating benefit, I think, so much more, because we can talk about this all day because we get it and this is what we do. But actually, if you're not in this space and you go to your GP surgery, how are we translating that saving in energy or whatever it might be, or actually there's more sensors, more monitors, we're collecting more data to prepare ourselves for what the next generation of healthcare is going to look and feel like, which will make patients' outcomes better. And this is the bit I think I'm going to be spending my time at NHSPS about how do we bring all these things together in a way that is accessible to people without putting them off, or indeed creating a sense of despair. Because, you know, if you can imagine that situation, you go into GP surgery and we just pile in the whole climate change and all the rest of it, and they're going to come out not better than they went in.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, so great. But we've got to make it meaningful, and you know, because you said it yourself before about we all care, and I think as collectively we shouldn't be afraid that we are allowed to care. We are human, and that's fundamental to how we can solve the challenges we've got.
Shamir, this has been awesome and incredibly insightful. I think for the listeners out there, what we've kind of learned today is that community is a driving factor. And there's actually a positive story coming out of the NHS with the likes of Shamir in Property Services, looking at how these community practices, local environments can be better and simpler for people as medicine evolves, like it is with there. How are we encouraging that positive impact into National Health Service? And for that, as a positive for the NHS right now, especially with your BREEAM background, it's quite a good note to end on.
Yeah, I'll say it's my favourite one so far.
Thank you. Ooh,
I enjoyed that. I changed it a little down.
Thank you guys. And again, like, subscribe and share more guests because we love you. Peace.
Tell Greta to allow me, I know that my carbon footprint's large.